Welcome to the Passive Income Podcast. I am your host, Dividend Dave. Please be sure to join the Passive Income Posse by clicking that subscribe button below. We are getting extremely close to that 1,000 subscriber milestone, so I would really appreciate it if you joined the posse. And joining me on today's podcast, you know I'm on Twitter and on YouTube at European DGI. I'm going to throw it over to you to give yourself an introduction.
Hi, Dividend Dave. Thank you first of all for the invite. I'm really, humbled that you're taking the time actually here to let me share a bit of my story. So I'm European DGI. I started blogging around 3 years ago. At the start of the pandemic, actually a little bit before the pandemic, I had this urge to start sharing my knowledge. I'm living in Poland at the moment. It's one of the bigger countries in Europe, actually. I would say in probably the most central European country from that point of view. Yeah, like I said, happy to be on the podcast.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for spending some of your time with me as well. And you are the first guest that isn't Canadian or American. So the first guest from Europe, from, as we would say, across the pond. And yeah, I'm sure I'm going to learn a lot about the European market because, quite honestly, I know very little about it. And I know we both know a lot about the American market simply because they're huge global companies. But hopefully, maybe I can help you learn a little bit about the Canadian market as well. So
Yeah,
if
that
you're
would be
ready,
cool.
you wanna just get into it?
Yeah, let's do it. Let's do it. I'm ready.
Awesome. So, I just like to kinda go over different sectors and different, like, sort of, REITs, energy, telecoms, banks, and just kinda go
Mhm.
through each sector and any companies that you like or don't like, and I'm very sure that I'm gonna learn about some European companies that are probably great companies that I've never heard of before. And
Yeah.
so, yeah, any particular sector that you really focus on or any company within any of those sectors that you wanna start with?
Well, generally, I'm a big fan of the consumer staples sector. It's probably the most boring sector for many investors, but for me, it's really nice because we're really talking about companies that are really serving the bottom of the Maslow pyramid, right? We all need
Right.
shelter. We all need love. We all need food, and consumer staples are typically really targeting these kinds of topics. So for me, that means like whether there's a recession or not, usually people cut their spending on eating out, right? So
Mhm.
this is good again for the supermarket chains and the Unilevers of this world. So
Right.
having that as an anchor of my portfolio, I think is kind of giving me this all-weather portfolio, as Ray Dalio always talks about. He means it, of course, in a different situation, different setup, but for me, it's all about stability and predictability there.
Yeah, and I understand that. As soon as you said consumer staples, I was like, "Yeah, I get it." Sometimes investing should be boring. It should just be like, okay. And as soon as you said staples, obviously the first two things I thought of were Walmart and Costco, right? Like the two of the
Yeah.
biggest American companies that are very much recession proof. People have to eat. People are still going to buy groceries, whether the market's up, down, bull market, bear market, doesn't really matter. You still have to go and get your milk, bread, and eggs, so to speak. So yeah, I totally get that. And then you mentioned Unilever, which I see quite a bit on Twitter. And correct me
Mhm.
if I'm wrong. Are they from the UK? Are they a UK company?
Nowadays you could say so, yes. But actually, I believe in 1929 it was a merger between the Lever brothers, I believe. I don't exactly how they were called, and something like Margarine Union. I'm really doing this from my head.
Yeah, that's okay.
A merger between a UK and a Dutch company, effectively.
Oh, okay.
They have been always dual listed, even during the war. I would even say the fact that they had this dual listing saved them also from the Nazi Germans, Nazi Germany at the time,
Right.
because it's really interesting. I studied even the time of the Second World War and their annual reports, and there are two or three out of them that you can grab. And even the CEO at the time in 1942 or something like that said, like, "Hey guys, we don't know if there is any Dutch investor there, but we've paid dividends to the UK investors or something like that, and once once you have access to it, let us know the dividends are there for you, something like that." So that's really is really a nice sign of the times that we were in at the time, right? So they were really conscious about their their, let's say, obligation to the shareholders, but they couldn't contact with anyone, so they even couldn't say anything properly about the revenues and the earnings there. But that's a long history. And then I think 2 or 3 years ago, the Dutch government didn't really support Unilever either, and at that moment in time, because they were looking for more like a dividend-friendly tax situation,
Right.
like Royal Dutch Shell, who became now also a British company. So actually,
Yep.
although there's a Brexit, they
Mhm.
both became UK listed companies only. They're dual listings, so they say, of course, efficiency and such. But in the politics, it was really about the dividend tax and everything, and which is, of course, way more attractive for a company to be seated in the UK with that.
Interesting. So a little bit of a history lesson there for us as well, between from 1929 right up through the Second World War. And yeah, that's very interesting as well. Very interesting to hear, well, the history of companies and how they handled things like, obviously I know the history of the Great Depression,
Mhm.
after 1929 as well, and then leading into World War II. And yeah, it's a kind of amazing to hear what companies did to survive, like with mergers
Yeah,
and whatever else. Like, obviously there was a lot of uncertainty going on between 1939 and 1945, and so yeah,
yeah,
extremely interesting to hear some of the history as well. So, you
yeah,
mentioned Royal Dutch. Actually, before I end that,
yeah,
um, Unilever, obviously, they're a very similar company to a Procter and Gamble,
yeah.
and you can probably argue a Johnson and Johnson as well. Just those household products that, in North America, everyone has Procter and Gamble and Johnson and Johnson products in their house for sure, and probably some Unilever as well. And I'm guessing in Europe, it's probably the other way around, where it's all Unilever products in your house, and then maybe some Procter and Gamble and some Johnson and Johnson as well.
No, no, no. I think both in America and in Europe, it's pretty much mixed. I mean, have you been eating Magnum ice cream?
No.
No, you don't know Magnum? Okay, so that's a pity, but really poor example. But every time when I'm in the States, let's say, and I walk around to the supermarket, I see a lot of Unilever products. And
Yeah.
if I'm here in Europe, there are a lot of Procter and Gamble products, but also Colgate Palmolive. Many people use
Yep.
Colgate as toothpaste. I think these companies are so global; they are such a household brands that you see them everywhere. They're just
Yeah.
everywhere.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Okay. Move. Another one you mentioned there was Royal Shell, and if you want to get into sort of energy, utilities, oil and gas, anything
Yeah.
beyond, on Shell that,
Well, so I'm really big on Shell. I think is my biggest position, and ExxonMobil is my second position. So I like dark black oil, specifically at the bottom of the cycle. I remember that in 2020, we had all those kids coming in saying like, diamond hands, you need this technology and everything. Oil's dead, and I felt like, yeah, and then you're saying
except
that
it
while you're
isn't.
driving, yeah, you're saying this while you're driving to work in oil, while you're shipping goods from China for the cheapest, which is using oil tankers. I said are these big ships that are on all kinds of dirty energy. I said doing all the logistics for us. So I felt like, no, this is just not true. I do believe that energy is in transition, and climate change a lot is pushing this. And but that's why I like Royal Dutch Shell, because Royal Dutch Shell, they did their own, let's say, strategic analysis, and they said like, guys, we cannot just jump overnight from deep dark oil onto wind energy, right?
Right.
So they saw liquid natural gas as a transitory energy for 2 3 decades. And I think being in Canada, I mean,
Yeah,
that's like a big economic boon, I think, for all of you there with the
for
LNG
sure.
terminals you have also near Vancouver. So that why at almost at the bottom I bought some more Shell as well. And yeah, it's a company that I think is really great in capital allocation. I hated, of course, their dividend cut, but I applaud the CEO for having done it at that time, because the dividend was not sustainable anymore since 2016, when the first oil crisis
Yeah.
hit. So for me, these are just great companies. And then you have Shell, but you have also Total Energies listed in Paris. I think they are even further on the curve when it comes to transition here. And you've got, of course, BP, but they are not a stable dividend payer. They had Deep Horizon, and then afterwards, I believe, to cut another time. So for me, the most reliable here is Total Energies, and then Shell is the second, I would say, over in Europe.
Interesting, interesting. So here's another thing that I haven't really thought of, but I want to ask you now because you just sort of you mentioned trading in London, trading in Paris. I believe you were referring to trading in the Netherlands when
Yeah,
we were talking about Unilever, and then
yeah,
I know there's an exchange in Germany. Like, how many
yeah,
exchanges are you on, and do you follow? Like here in North America, it's basically Toronto and New York, right? Those
yeah.
are your exchanges, and so I'm
So
just
I
kind of
don't
curious about.
follow. Yeah, that's interesting. How you look at that, because I can see which exchanges I trade on, because every time with the European broker in January, the Giro, I need to pay a €2.5 exchange commission fee to have access to it. And then I was surprised that I'm trading on 11 exchanges.
11.
But yeah, but that's not how it feels for me. It is for me like just America and Europe. Yeah, I buy my shit because it's so accessible also in Europe. The
Right.
the, the real struggle is the tax system. Yes, so in Switzerland you pay 35% dividend withholding tax. In Sweden you pay 30% dividend withholding tax. In Poland 19% where I'm seated. In France you pay, I believe, 28% or something like that. But then as a foreigner, you're eligible to only pay 12.5% or something like that. In the UK, you don't pay dividend tax. Germany, 27%. So the issue here is like, okay, cool. And then we have all bilateral treaties that that we are only allowed to be maximum charged 15% or something like that. So you can deduct that from your own tax form at home, that you paid 15% of that. But and the rest that you paid more, you need to request back from those countries, and that's where the struggle starts, because this is all paper forms that you need to download. Then you need to go to your own tax office, getting a proof that you are tax eligible in that year and that you paid your taxes. Plus, the cheap brokers are not giving you really bank statements of your dividend payments, rather just a download in an Excel sheet. And those are most of the times not even accepted by the tax authority. So in other words, it's nearly impossible as a simple person to request all the taxes back. I'm trying to. Typically can easily, with Germany, can take more than a year, yeah,
Wow.
without getting even a proper answer. They just kind of give you an FU answer if you ask for status update. That's reality. The European Union knows it. They have already a 10-year project or a 10-year ambition to start fixing this, but I have no illusion there. I would be surprised if in my lifetime we would ever see an automated way of doing this, like what we have with the States, right? With the States is also higher tax, but we just fill in a form via the broker, everything goes automatically, and we only get charged 15% of dividend tax.
Wow, that sounds very complicated and confusing, and like you said, with Germany, it can take over a year, so that means you're into the next tax year, and you're just fighting the cycle all over again by the sounds of it.
Well, the nice thing is that you can, in most of the countries, allow you to submit the tax once in 3 or 4 years, and then
Okay.
it applies to that whole period. But nevertheless, it's wasted time that we don't need, and it's stuff that can be really easily automated. So, and this, I think, is the issue that we have in Europe here. That when it comes to cross-border, we're actually really a young union. We exist just for 20 years, like in this shape and form, right?
Right.
So, and if it's not a priority on political level, because we're fighting in Europe, for instance, a war in Ukraine, there, the
Mhm.
Russians, and Europe is supporting. Yeah, I can imagine that they're a little bit less worried about what their clerks are doing around avoidance of double taxation.
Right, yeah. No, obviously, yeah, they have more important things to worry about than refunding some dividends to some investors, I guess, is what you're saying, and I
Yeah.
I understand, I get it for sure.
Yeah. So, but it is what it is. It's actually a reason why many European investors only invest in American stocks, as an example, and British stocks. Many European investors don't want to invest in Germany just because of the dividend tax situation.
Right.
But I always tell them, like, it's a pity, because somehow those, if you look at the multiples of German stocks, I think it's priced in these kinds of issues. So I always try to look at the yield after tax. So it's a metric that I look at. So My normal dividend yield that I'm looking for is like 3.25% on average as when I invest. And then yield after tax, I usually look at like 2.8%, something like that. So that kind of compensates for this. Sometimes you have how you say it? Sometimes you have a dividend stock that's maybe 4%, but then after tax it's 2.8% if you go to a Swiss stock or something like that. And then for me, it's still accessible, and I will try one time in those 3 4 years to get the tax back.
Right. I feel like all of a sudden I'm so lucky sitting here in Canada. We have an account called a TFSA. I'm sure you've seen people tweet about it
Hmm.
on Twitter, and
Yeah,
it's basically called a tax-free savings account. And I have always said it should be called a tax-free investment account, but it's obviously very good vehicle because you don't pay taxes on it up until you're maxed out. They
yeah,
started it, I want to say about 2006, 2007, and it was $5,000. Then they added another $5,000. Then uh,
yeah.
say 5 years later, it went up to 5,500. A few years later, up to 6,500, and so now it's retroactive. So if you were starting out today as a 20-something-year-old person and you've never contributed one penny to your TFSA, you would have all of that going back to say
Oh,
2006. So it's
nice.
up to about $100,000 or close to maybe $96,000
Yeah,
until you're maxed out, right? So you have quite a good chunk there before, to start with, basically, right?
yeah,
And obviously, there's older people who haven't maxed out, but then hey, that's good. You're sitting on 96,000 tax-free dollars or
yeah,
whatever. I'd have to go back and look at the exact math to see what it
yeah.
adds up to right now, what year it was started, and add them all up. But
And
yeah,
you
so
can
that's a very
consume.
nice. It's very nice to obviously have some tax-free advantages in that one account.
Yeah, and you can consume the profits directly, or is it something that gets released when you're turning 60 or
Oh no,
65?
yeah, you
Oh,
can withdraw
nice.
whenever. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. You're lucky. It's true.
um, yeah. So, and I'm not a tax expert by any means. I don't. I've said in several past podcasts, definitely look up someone else who knows more about the tax
Mhm.
situation than I do.
Yeah.
Because we do have other accounts too that once you have that TFSA maxed out where you are taxable, but then they have other tax advantages and benefits like an RRSP, which is the one where you can still withdraw from it, but you shouldn't withdraw
Yeah.
from it until you're say 60 or 65. But
Oh,
again,
nice.
those are questions for people that know way more about taxes than I do.
Yeah. Nice. No, we don't have that fortune, unfortunately. But yeah, and I don't have illusions there, like I mentioned.
Right.
So it's just a bit harder. More of my wealth is being shared with the tax authorities, and I hope they spend it better than I would.
Yeah, it does sound difficult, like, so many different countries and so many different rules, and like you said, with the European Union still only being 20 or so years old, it's something that they do need to work out in the future, but like you
Yeah,
said,
and
who knows when in the future that will be, right?
yeah, and this is also one of the reasons why I started investing and why I chose my nickname European DGI, because I just want to show that it's still possible. And because the alternative is that you depend on your I said government's pension plan. And the issue is with that is that over the last decade, just in the Netherlands, it was not re-indexing with inflation. I believe out of the 10 years, 8 years, it was 0%, while there was a 2% or 1.8% inflation. Yeah, this year there's like a 15% inflation, and maybe they're only re-indexing to a 3%. And what
Yeah,
it tells you is that your purchasing power in a decade, you lost almost 25% in purchasing power. Now I still have at least 2 decades to go. Yes. So if you start thinking like that, then it really looks grim. Yeah. And
right.
really looks grim. And there are just less and less youngsters that will be able to pay for the elderly because many pension systems like that work as well, right? That the money is actually not necessarily totally there, but it's being paid for by the youngsters via social contributions. So for me, taking that path is way more dangerous if you want to live a good retirement compared to going the dividend investing route and paying a little bit more tax along the journey.
Yeah, understandable, understandable. I think that's probably enough on taxes. Good.
Yeah, I think as well.
Um, Again, as you probably know from seeing on Twitter, following myself and other different Canadians. The Canadian banks are, you know, strong investments, and I'm just kind of curious if there's anything well, first, how familiar are you with the Canadian banks, and is there anything in Europe that would be even close to similar?
Well, I'm a bit familiar with it. We had also, because I'm a host also of the Dividend Talk podcast, right? And
Yeah,
we had Talkan, the Canadian blogger, on, and he was explaining a little bit about the banks the other day. But look, at, I always say bankers are wankers because I'm still remembering the 2008 crisis, and specifically in Europe, it was really bad. We had to bail out most of the banks, and they still didn't pay the bill for what happened at that time. Um, and for me, even when you look at that in Europe, investing in banks, if you follow a dividend growth strategy, I don't find it a smart strategy because the governments are not happy. The sentiment is really bad towards banks. Also, if you go to the violation tracker, it's fraud all the time, whether it's Libor fraud or whatever it is. I mean, we can even talk about BNP Paribas, right, with the export controls at the time that get fined, whether it's ING again that is frauding their customers or playing with the Libor and such. Um, it's just they just don't have a good rep, and I think it's the same in America with Wells Fargo, yeah, creating illegal accounts. So the issue only in Europe is that Europe is continuously finding them, and they are not friendly to the banks. So what happened in 2020? Effectively, they said, like with COVID entering, okay, you cannot pay a dividend, yeah, because there is a system risk to your company, and yeah, you need to withhold from rewarding your shareholders at this time and make sure that you're liquid, yeah, because the system is under stress. So, and when do you depend most on your dividend income is when the system is under stress. So for me, that's the reason why I see banks as uninvestable in Europe,
right.
and even largely in America, because I don't like having a pay cut. Yeah, and I think Canadian banks are probably the only ones that I heard of that were quite reliable in 2008 and in 2020.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Um, there is a tweet out there, and I don't have it right now to pull up on screen, but I'm sure people have heard me talk about it before. And again, shout out and credit to at Settling Nomads for putting this tweet up. It was from like last October, but it shows the longevity of the Canadian banks paying dividends, and it goes back to
Mhm.
1829. So in 6 years, that first bank is coming up on a 200-year anniversary, and they've
Ah,
all
look at
paid
that.
dividends for over 150 years. And yeah, and you're right, they were much better well positioned than probably any other of the banks in anywhere else in the world for 2008. Obviously, we still had a recession in 2008 and 9 in Canada
Yeah,
because of America, basically, right? When the old
yeah,
saying is when the USA sneezes, Canada catches a cold, and obviously that whatever happens over there affects us,
yeah. Same we say in Europe. Exactly the same.
right?
So, but that's good to see, right? I just think it's in Europe is different. Many of those companies were just at the brink of bankruptcy, and we had to bail out some of those companies as well. So it doesn't mean that they are bad, that there's nothing to invest in the financial sector. To the contrary, because I think we have really great insurance companies.
Right.
One of my favorite ones is Allianz. Actually, they got also fined for having done some, I think to a pension fund somewhere in the States where they misled the teachers or something like that. And they lost a lot of money, but that's being compensated. But generally, Allianz, Munich are reinsurance, ASR in the Netherlands, Nationale Nederlanden in the Netherlands. For me, those are four really well-positioned dividend stocks with progressive dividend policy, and I own also three of them. The only one that I don't own yet is Nationale Nederlanden. But again, insurance business with the culture here, I think many people are 2-3 times insured because it's like they usually say, if you go on holiday, make sure that everything is covered, and there's really a risk avoidance kind of culture in some countries. So this is
Right.
of course perfect for insurance companies. And what I like is always when you go abroad somewhere and you just turn the TV on, you can see from the commercial what is important to people. So in Poland, I usually see commercials of medicines against sneezing, a cold, and such on TV. In the
Right.
Netherlands, you see often insurance. Are you insured? And then in the States, you have also a lot of these kinds of consulting services, or even when it comes to drugs, right? And I think in Europe, you would never see a product from Apfi, for instance, being as a commercial on TV. But then you go to America and you see this, right?
Mhm.
So for me, this is always really interesting to get a feeling a bit of what the culture pays attention to. And somehow, I can't say there's a correlation. You see that those businesses are typically thriving as well in those countries.
Yeah, yeah. We have 2 well, obviously, we have many insurance companies here in Canada as well, but 2 that are very high up on the dividend investor, uh, likes and wants or watch list
Hmm.
are, uh, Manulife and Sun Life Financial. Manulife
Yeah.
Financial and Sun Life Financial. I don't know if you ever heard of them before, but yeah, kinda similar
Yeah.
idea that, dividend investors really like them, like the yield and the growth. I don't
Yeah.
own either of them as of right now, so but yeah, it would those I would have no problem looking into and probably investing in at some point in the future, but so I understand insurance companies tend to be a really good safe place as well, right?
I think
Again,
so.
going
Yeah.
back to your investing can be and should be boring, just let it be boring, let the dividends roll
Yeah.
in every month or every quarter, whatever it may be.
Yeah, exactly. And insurance companies, I think, is also what Buffett so much likes about it. I mean, these businesses get to collect the money, and they don't need to pay it out straight away. So they can use that money, this float, let's say, to earn an interest on it and something like that. And with that, prop up the earnings, right?
Right,
So that's really what I like about such kind of business model. And you just need to be prepared as such a business for these once in a decade events that can wipe out your whole balance sheet. So that's what I pay attention to with those companies. Do they have enough cash on hand, let's say, for if something really extra black swan event happens, that they are not straight away at the brink of bankruptcy, right?
right. Yeah, interesting. No, yeah, that's a good point. That is a good point. You did mention there about TV commercials in Poland kind of being about, catching a cold or sneezing and whatnot. So it kind of made me think of the healthcare sector. And we've already talked about a few like Johnson and Johnson,
Mhm.
which obviously Johnson and Johnson, it's such a big company. And they're breaking into their own different categories of healthcare on the one side and the consumer staples and whatnot on the other side. So I guess just anything more on healthcare. It's kind of funny when I have American guests on and we talk about healthcare because obviously healthcare in the US is just completely different than pretty well everywhere else in the world, right? So
Yeah.
I guess just any thoughts on healthcare in Europe and healthcare stocks or companies?
Yeah, definitely. But at first, I would like to say something about Johnson Johnson, maybe also about Americans. We actually need to thank the Americans, right?
Yeah,
Because they are paying these exuberant drug prices so that we have them relatively cheap in Canada and Europe. We should not forget about that, right? So I know they hate it when we say this, but on the other hand, I do see this as kind of reality, and they have a really good point there. When it comes to Johnson Johnson, I'm always also warning a little bit people because the dividend growth looks really nice, like clockwork, 6%, 7% every time. But if you start looking under the hood of this growth engine, what do you see there? You see a consumer business that has been flat for the last decade. You see a medtech business which has been not doing anything really either over the last years. Then you look at the pharma business, and what surprised me is that the growth mainly comes from one or two drugs really at Johnson Johnson. So what I'm trying to say with this is like if people just think like because they grew 6% every year for the last 10 years, they will easily do it again in the next 10 years. Well, I would argue that with the consumer business spinning off, there's more risk introduced into Johnson Johnson as a business because it becomes more and more a pipeline question
yeah,
towards this company. And we know what it means with pipelines. Once your blockbusters start to go off patent, yeah, you need to replace it, and that's not easy. So with Johnson Johnson, way more risk is being introduced to the business, and I don't think many people realize this. Nevertheless, I own it. I believe that they have such a history and a focus on there that they will be able to manage that going forward. But this falls really into the category like know what you own. Yeah, and it's not so well diversified anymore as people like to think. Now, when it comes then to European healthcare stocks, actually, I think healthcare is still one of those economies that Europe is strong at. Yeah, we
Yep.
have, for instance, Novartis. We have was it? I believe GSK, GlaxoSmithKline. We have Roche. So there we have actually Fresenius. And when it comes to pharma, I think this is still one of the sectors where Europe is really, really strong. Sanofi as well, and where there are quite some nice historical dividend payers as well. So if you look at the dividend aristocrats, you would look into those kinds of companies, and I own several of them.
Yeah, interesting. That's actually interesting. I've heard of a lot of those companies that you just mentioned in the healthcare, and I didn't even realize that they were all European, right? Like, because you just
Yeah,
sometimes, especially here in Canada, you just sometimes think it's an American company without
yeah.
even thinking about it or looking into it, because that's just the way it is.
Yeah, I think that Europe is generally strong in the energy sector, the engineering sector, and the healthcare sector. All the rest, I think, it lost its superiority to other nations in the world, like the US or China, as an example.
Right, right. Interesting. You mentioned engineering. So would you talk about like the heavy industrials, like a Caterpillar and John Deere in that sector,
Well,
or
hey, let's yeah, definitely, but let's see what in America, right? General Electric, how screwed up that went, right? And just because of Jeff Immelt having too much ego and not being able to live up to Jack Welch, effectively destroying the whole company. But and then you see Siemens at the same time, yeah, just chugging along and
yeah,
really really doing an awesome job. I mean, they are building the trams, they're building trains, windmills. You can't even think about how crazy it is all that even the turbines in the
yeah,
oil and gas industry. Siemens is really a big player there, and also ABB from Switzerland as well.
yeah.
And I have so much appreciation for them, specifically because one of my biggest failures was General Electric, and I studied where it all went wrong. And then I look at Siemens and ABB, and I think like, why couldn't GE do like this?
Right.
Yeah, just chugging along because some people say it's the death of the industrial. Yeah, if you look at General Electric, yes. Yeah, but then if you look at Honeywell and then Siemens and such, it shows that it's possible. Yeah, so we shouldn't look at one bad actor in the system and think that the whole industrial concept of having these large companies are dead. No, to the contrary, I would even say.
To your point there, so I used to work construction, and I worked several years building solar farms. So these big 100
Mhm.
acre farms
Yeah.
of solar panels. And yeah, there were ABB and Siemens switches and control panels everywhere throughout these farms. So it just kind of goes to
Yeah.
show you those companies, have a major foothold in that industry, right?
Yeah, they
Globally.
have yeah, because they didn't create such financial arms like General Electric had, and that they saw like a goose that was laying golden eggs. No, they continuously kept their vision to the engineering part of it. If you go to ABB, the software that comes with this, right, and the documentation is just state of the art when you compare it to their competitors. So yeah, no wonder that engineers want to continue, how you say it, purchasing those kinds of equipments.
Yeah. Interesting. So kind of on the similar topic, like technology in general, sort of getting back to the more mainstream
Yeah.
technology stocks like your Google, Amazon, etc., Facebook.
Yeah, it's a bit hard, right? I mean, we have SAP, good old SAP. When you think
Yeah.
about the blue chip companies, it's probably the most hated software in every corporate. So yeah, that's still there. They're transitioning a lot of their customers through the cloud. That's what they are trying to do. It's 2023, bit late. So I guess that says it all. I think we have still quite some startups. Also think about Spotify, but those are not necessarily all good dividend payers yet. We have
Right.
Atien, which is fintech. LiveChat in Poland is actually a company that is really automating customer call centers and help desk centers. They've been growing the dividend over the last 8 years quite nicely, but they pay almost all their earnings out. I think 80 or 90% of their earnings out. It's I believe ticker symbol LVC if people want to look it up. But their earnings growth is also like 20 or 30% year over year. They are really, really in a golden era at the moment with their business. So I'm just worried a little bit whether what will happen to the dividend when the earnings start to slow down. But generally saying, there are a few stocks, but it can't compare with what's happening in the States and Silicon Valley. Far from
Right.
it.
Yeah. I moving right along into another sector that I like and I like to talk about. We have a couple of very strong companies in Canada in the telecommunications,
Hmm.
being Bell Canada and TELUS and Rogers.
Yeah.
And I'm just kind of curious, what is there in Europe? Obviously, telecommunications is a huge global sector, and Europe must have some big players as well.
Yeah, and usually those players are still big in the countries of origin because those were national companies in the past. They became public spin-offs, often in the early days, let's say late 90s, early 2000s, still with a large stake of the government into it. But nowadays, I would say it's way more. I think it's public. You could say that, but it does mean that it's hard to compete. So we have Vodafone. This might be a company that you know.
Yep.
T-Mobile, of course, you know it from T-Mobile US, but the other big parent is in Germany. Orange from France, KPN in the Netherlands, Elisa in Finland, I believe. So these are all big companies. They have also been benefiting from the further integration of Europe, but they are not reliable dividend growers. They all went through the difficult times and had to cut dividends, like Vodafone, Orange. So I treat them more as like the high yield stocks, but cutting their dividends from time to time. For me, therefore, it's not really a business to invest in, but so I don't hold any of those telecom stocks. And we have AT&T as well, right? What a drama there. So I guess we are left with Verizon and maybe T-Mobile US that are actually still showing commitment to the dividend growth.
Yeah, wow. I have heard of Vodafone, and I didn't realize that the American telcos were expanding into Europe. And it
Which
sounds
no,
almost
no, not really, because T-Mobile is a German, I believe, a German company from origin.
oh,
Yeah, and then
okay.
T-Mobile, I need to look it up. I might even be wrong, but T-Mobile US, I believe, was always like, I think T-Mobile, let's say Germany has actually still probably a large stake in T-Mobile US. But we had John Legere, the famous CEO, that of course brought T-Mobile US to the moon, right?
Yeah, it's almost exact opposite for the three I mentioned here in Canada, Bell, TELUS, and
Hmm.
Rogers. Rogers is in a huge takeover with Shaw Communications, um,
Hmm.
and that's regulatory if they allow it or not. There's a whole lot going on there. Bell has been around since inception of the telephone, and they a very strong dividend payer with dividend growth. So,
Yeah,
and TELUS has been around a long time too with a nice yield and growth. Bell is the only one of the 3 that I own, so,
yeah.
just full disclosure there. Um, Before we get into talking about some of your social media presence on YouTube and your blog and Twitter, one more sector that I really like to discuss is REITs, real estate investment trusts. I hold
Mhm.
quite a few here in Canada, and I'm just kind of wondering what the real estate landscape is in Europe.
Yeah, it's probably good to mention that because most of the real estate businesses that you can invest in are not real estate investment trusts in Europe. Some countries don't even know this type of, I guess, legal entity. Yeah.
Right.
But I'm invested, as an example, in Cibus Nordic, which is a Swedish real estate company. It owns supermarkets that it leases back to or rents back to supermarket operating chains. So that's for me a really nice one. That profile doesn't look so good yet. They're working on a better credit rating, so it is a bit more of a risky investment, I would say. I was owning Castellum in Sweden, but there was a prima donna as a CEO who got a margin call on a second business and had to sell his shares to kind of the Warren Buffett of nor I sit. North Europe, and yeah, this guy proposed to cut the dividends, so I had to sell it because I guess he wants to take all the money in himself. But we have Vonovia in German, which is a lot in public housing. If you know a little bit of Germany, there it's like there's really strict regulation that for affordable housing, so that people at minimum income or low income can still get a proper house. So this company is also in distress, lots of debt. Then there are, of course, several real estate companies, also in the Netherlands. I believe it's called Euro Commercial and such. They own a lot of the shopping malls and everything. But again, they're really high dividend payments typically. But uh, the COVID crash really brought an end to several of those. So it's not an easy sector to invest in. Typically, really high yield, but seeing dividend grow for many many years is really really difficult because they all go through their periods, and then you come back to the dividend culture in Europe. Also the regulators that effectively put companies sometimes under pressure, saying like, hey, if you need support, cut your dividend.
Yeah, interesting. I like that one. I think you mentioned Sweden and supermarkets kind of goes right back to what you said off the top about the,
Yeah,
consumer staples being, one of your favorite
yeah,
sectors. And so, yeah, you're playing the real estate, but also um, covering that consumer staple sector within
And so
real
that's
estate.
that's Siebes, and I own another small position in Defama in Germany, which does something similar, much better capitalized, small cap. So that's always important to mention that, because when we're talking about small caps, there's hardly liquidity there. Yeah, so if you buy such a shares, um, uh, just for a certain entry price, you shouldn't be afraid surprised when you see suddenly swings like -8% or +8% just because one person buys something. That's
Right.
the issue with the lack of liquidity there. So it's always a warning for me when you're looking into these kinds of companies to really watch out with that. It's not easy to get out. It's not easy to sell the shares under stress.
Yeah. Very interesting point that you said some of the countries in Europe don't even know that it's such a thing as a REIT, a real estate investment trust exists as an entity because obviously here in North America, in both Canada and the US, they're extremely popular. I'm sure you've seen many
Yeah,
tweets about realty income on Twitter, and maybe you've seen some of mine or others in Canada about some of the different ones in Canada as well. So
yeah.
very interesting point that some of the European countries it's just not even a thing. It doesn't even exist.
Yeah, so what you see is that I said that they just need to, that they don't need to pay 80% of their income as dividends. They don't need to. So often they have a payout ratio of 30 or 40% as an example. Yeah,
Right.
so that's just like, although they're a real estate business, yeah, they have a different tax profile, I guess, what it comes down to.
Interesting, interesting. So yeah, like I said, I'm gonna pull up your YouTube here, and you can find them on YouTube at European Dividend Growth Investor, and getting very close to 7,000 subscribers. So I don't know, just want to talk through this a little bit, how you got started on YouTube.
Hmm. Yeah, okay. So look, I started blogging in 2020. I was doing that for, let's say, a year. And while I like writing, it is hard sometimes to write as a non-native English speaker in English. And sometimes I felt like, what I'm writing here is so much easier just when I could pull up my screen and show it to people instead of making 100 screenshots. So
Right.
that's why I felt like, okay, let's start playing around with YouTube. Actually, I enjoyed it quite a little bit. It takes me more than writing an article because it's not just the research that goes into it and making the notes, and you can see a note as a blog post, but also working on the visuals and everything and the editing. So, but that's actually why I started. And then, somehow actually it did well. I reached 1,000 subscribers at a certain moment,
Yeah.
and yeah, people enjoyed it. So as you can see, I've got 7,000 subscribers. I'm now 2 years busy, so it's not like this is like a number that some of the fast growers get excited about. But I'm doing it. I'm trying to do it once a week, but in reality, I do it once in 2 or 3 weeks, so it's not
Hmm.
so regular. Because for me, my private life goes first. I will never exchange time with the kids for making a YouTube video like that. So
Understandable.
yeah, I'm quite proud on how far this got, and specifically the community behind it. So I don't have a profit target here or something like that. I like my job, so I will always make sure that my job is that's why I'm performing the best. That really pays my income to invest in dividends. So this is a bit of a hobby, especially the community building. And yeah, YouTube is for me a vehicle to share my knowledge and to share inspiration about dividend stocks.
Yeah, that's awesome, and obviously, when you get close to 7,000 subscribers, you're not replacing your full-time income, but it's a nice little side hustle. If YouTube's gonna pay you 100 or 200 bucks a month, you're gonna take that all day long, right?
Yeah, 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 and that's what it is. It's usually like around 150 euro or something like that. But I needed also to cover the costs. Yeah, so with my blog hosting, I have an email list which costs 32 euro per month. So all of this stuff adds up. So from this 150 euro, if I have like 20 euro left or something like that, then it's much because my average cost is around 75 to 100 euros per month. And I always look at it like that. Like I want to invest in the platforms that I have to increase the quality. Also, maybe to buy licenses to data providers, but I don't want to pay for it. So I expect advertising revenue to cover the costs, and that's how I look at it.
Yeah, and I think that's great. You're, like I said, that close or 7,000 subscribers in just a couple years is great success on YouTube. I'm gonna pull up your, blog here next, and if you just wanna
Yeah.
talk to
So
your blog a little bit, how you got started there, and
Yeah, so this was really like at the start 2020, and I was of course inspired by the greatest of all time dividend growth investor and Jason Fieber with Dividend Mantra and such. They were blogging, and it always took me a long time to be able to write as well. And then I thought like, okay, I just have to get started one time. And I put myself a schedule for 2 months to write 2 blog posts per week to get into it, because I know for myself that's how I create habits. So I got into the habit, and yeah, from there it actually became really quickly popular because there are not so many Europeans that are blogging with a European perspective, like the
right.
tax impact, all these kinds of things. But also, there's not a lot of people that write about European dividend stocks, even because we all have a currency risk as well. Yeah, so to keeping it in your native currency is also really fine, really nice. So that's also why I started to research about 250 or 300 companies to study, okay, which are really the dividend growers here. And this is where you see the article here, 30 European dividend aristocrats. And I think that really made it popular, the blog, because I kind of brought up some names that people would have never considered, even that those are blue chip companies in Europe that you can kind of rely on when it comes to dividend growth.
Yeah, I was definitely gonna mention there's a couple of very, interesting headlines right there as I'm scrolling, up and down just to show the website or the blog, and obviously, yeah, 30 European dividend aristocrats looks very interesting, and these 2 also look very interesting, the best UK div stock, the best Dutch dividend stock.
Yeah. Yeah, so such an article costs me typically 2 to 3 months to write. It's not so much about the writing, but it's I need to go to for instance, the London Stock Exchange, and literally go company by company. I don't have a Bloomberg terminal or something like that. So for me, this takes me a lot of time to analyze. But nevertheless, I like it.
Yeah.
I could have been a librarian, I guess, or an historian.
Oh, that's funny, yeah, no, and you mentioned it's difficult for you to write in English as English is, your second language, but I think you're doing an incredible job, right? Your English is very good, extremely good, better than extremely
Oh,
good.
thank you. Thank you.
And then I was also just gonna show your Twitter, as most of us know, you can find them on Twitter at European_DGI, and obviously the Div Twit community is a lot of fun. We have a lot of fun with each other, but we also share a lot of knowledge. And
Hmm.
yeah, you have quite a following there as well. Over almost 15,000 followers on Twitter. So
Yeah, that's for me. It's just humbling, Dave. I mean, come on, imagine this: 15,000. Put them in a football stadium, and I mean soccer with that, right?
yeah,
You've got a small team in let's say the Premiership, fully full of people. Uh,
yeah.
just watching what you're tweeting. I mean, this is insane when you
That is
think
a very
about it.
interesting perspective. Just put 15,000 people into a stadium and yeah. And actually, that's about the same here in Canada for a hockey rink. They're usually, say,
Yeah.
15 to 18,000 people for an NHL hockey arena, and, yeah, so
Yeah, for an amateur that's tweeting about dividend investing and related topics. Yeah, it's insane when you think about it. But that's a nice thing of internet, right? A niche, what used to be a niche in a local country where few people will gather around the table and drink a beer, talk about it, because of the world is flat with this one, with the internet. You can access the whole world and get a conversation, and that's really what I love about growing up and being alive in these times at the moment.
yeah, I'd agree with that. It's like, yeah, you can just connect with people from everywhere in the world, Australia to Poland to,
Yeah.
everywhere, so it's been, this has been a very unique learning experience for me. Like I said, you were the very first European or non-North American guest I've had on the Passive Income Podcast, and I really appreciate you spending time with me this morning. I've definitely learned a lot, definitely, realized some companies that I knew. I didn't even realize, "Oh, that's a European company." And so that's, interesting as well. In closing, any final thoughts you'd like to share with the audience?
Well, if just like if you haven't tried dividend investing yet, at least give it a thought of consideration and try it. There's always this topic of the dividend, I said irrelevance theory and such, but I can tell you, once you know that few dividend stocks are paying your electrical bill into eternity, it changes your whole perspective
Yeah,
to investing. So if you're still like on the sidelines, I would say give it a try. I can tell you, cash really feels well getting into your account. Yeah, and to you, Dave, I hope you quickly get to the 1,000 subscribers. I think you have a really nice platform that
thank you.
deserves much more attention, and you're doing a great job. So really crossing my fingers for you that you reach that milestone really quickly, and maybe also get a little bit of advertising in return for your equipment and sponsoring that, right?
Yeah, that would be obviously, again, it's not retirement money, but, if YouTube wants to give me a few dollars a month, I'm gonna take it every month.
There you go. I would
And
say
just
so.
sorry, I should have said when we was going over your YouTube and blog, I will have those links in the description below as well. So,
Thank you.
and yeah, so again, thank you so much for spending nearly an hour, well, over an hour of your time with me once we got through the technical difficulties before we started recording. Those are always fun, and, yeah, I just can't thank you enough. Thank you also for your kind words there at the end about this platform, the Passive Income Podcast. I'm having a lot of fun doing it. I'm having a lot of fun talking to so many different people like yourself and learning so many things and hopefully sharing some valuable information with people that can, and to your last point too, sort of the idea of just get started. If you haven't started yet, just get started because yeah, it feels absolutely amazing every month or every quarter when, oh, there's another $5 or another $10 or whatever that dividend payment is from whatever company, and it's all of a sudden you realize, oh, this is adding up. Like this is
Exactly.
nice.
Yeah.
So, and yeah, anyways, like I said, I appreciate you so much for spending time with me this afternoon or this morning. This afternoon for you, morning for me. Quite the time difference. And yeah, I'm just gonna end it on that note. And thank you once again.
Thank you.
And be sure to subscribe.